We will be tweeting on connectivity and
I'll
platform
do the connectivity one, yeah.
and platform services.
Okay. And you do education, yeah, got it.
Live.
Thank you.
Professor Rohan, we are live. You are good to
Yes. Good afternoon. We are starting the virtual presentations and discussion on Sri Lanka during the COVID-19 lockdowns and the role played by digital technologies in many aspects of life, including how people got connected, education, how they obtained or did not obtain groceries, remote working, and various other questions that many people have been speculating about. But we now have the results of a sample survey that was conducted by LearnAsia with IDRC support over a period of several months, where we not only have data that is representative of the entire country, but we are also able to break down Western province versus the rest of the country. So I think it's quite an interesting set of results. Our format, I will very briefly explain, is that we will get the presentation of the results done within the first 30 minutes. Following that, I will have a brief exchanges for 30 minutes with our esteemed panelists, Mr. Oshada Senanayaka, who's both the chair of the ICT Agency of Sri Lanka and the Director General of Telecommunications, one of the most important policy makers on the subject in Sri Lanka. Mr. L. Ilangovan, Secretary of Education, Cultural Affairs, Sports and Youth Affairs of the Northern Provincial Council. Mr. Jeffrey Zulfa, founder and CEO of PICME Mobility Solutions, which I think everybody would have heard about, and who has been in the startup space for 23 years. And Karim Fernando, team leader for sustainable development at the Center for Poverty Analysis. So they will have basically a tight 30 minutes to essentially initiate the conversation. And then at the 1 hour point, approximately at 2 p.m., we will be inviting questions from the audience, which will include those from the media. So let's proceed. I'll first invite Senior Research Manager Gayani Hurulle, who to present the summary of the results. These results are very rich. I don't think we can present all of them. They will be made available in report form and the slide set and so on. But we will give you a taste of the most important results, which are of particular importance to our panelists in the next 30 minutes. Gayani?
Great. Thank you, Prof. I'll take over the screen for the next 30 minutes or so to walk you through our findings. So for those of you who don't know, LearnAsia is a pro-poor, pro-market think tank working on infrastructure policy and regulation issues. We work across developing Asia Pacific with special focus on South and Southeast Asia. The study we'll be focusing on today anchors on the COVID-19 pandemic. Given LearnAsia's area of expertise, we look at this from a connectivity and digital lens. We essentially look at two things. First is if and how COVID changed the state of digital connectivity in Sri Lanka. Second, the impact that it had on different facets of life, including education, work, food, and government services, like Prof mentioned earlier. Now, this is a part of a larger IDRC-funded study done to assess similar impacts across the Global South. So Learnasia conducted a similar survey in India, where we launched the findings a few weeks ago. My colleagues will actually put the link to the study on the chat in a moment. Our partners, Research ICT Africa and IEP, have actually conducted similar research in the African and Latin American context. We will be drawing on these from time to time to compare with Sri Lanka's performance during our presentation. So I'll actually take a pause here and hand the floor, the virtual floor, to my colleague Taraka, who is our statistician, to walk you through our methodology.
Thanks, Gani. So I'm going to very briefly explain the methodology. So as Prof mentioned, these are coming from a national representative survey about age over the age of 15 in Sri Lanka. So this was a face-to-face survey conducted among 2,500 individuals and households, which are randomly selected from 125, again, randomly selected GN divisions. So since this was a face-to-face survey, the survey was done under strict COVID-19 health and safety guideline to make sure the safety of the both respondents and the field staff. So as Prof mentioned earlier, even though this is a national representative study, we designed our sample to look at some indicators at more granular level, like national level, urban rural level, men versus women, Western province versus rest of Sri Lanka, and different socio-economic classification and age. So we did the fieldwork from March to October this year. Normally we do surveys in like 2 months or 3 months period, but due to the pandemic, the survey process was very slow. Sometimes, a couple of times, we have even had to stop the fieldwork due to the movement restrictions. Next slide, please. Yeah. So the survey methodology had 4 main stages. At the very first stage, we randomly select our primary sample units, or what we call PSUs, to conduct the survey. We used the national sample frame of Gramalida divisions from 2011 population and census data with the urban rural classification for sampling. We selected the predefined number of urban and rural PSUs using a technique called probability proportionate to size. That means the larger GNs with in terms of number of households have a higher chance of being selected into our sample. To make sure the randomness of the selection, we conducted a listing exercise of all households in a selected PSU in order to randomly select the households. As you know, in Sri Lanka, the GN sizes can vary from very small GNs with less than 100 households to larger GNs with more than couple of thousand households or even 5,000 households. So whenever the number of households in a GN exceed 250 households, we did the segmentation exercise to divide the GN division into homogeneous blocks having approximately about approximately 250 households. So then we randomly picked one to conduct the listing and the survey interviews. So at this stage 2, we did the verification of the PSU boundaries and conducted the listing. So we provided our field team of official GN level maps for all these 125 GN divisions. We took these maps from the survey department. These are official GN level maps. And the first thing the field team did was to verify the boundaries with key informant like Gramalidari officers. So then after that, they updated the population numbers in the map, and they did the segmentation exercise that I explained earlier. So depend on the size of the GN, the entire GN or a segment of the GN was randomly selected to do the listing, and enumerators conducted the listing of each and every household in that segment. So after that, they upload the data into our servers at the stage 3. So after they uploaded the data in the office, Learnasia researchers did the random selection of 20 households per GN to conduct the main survey interviews. We gave some 5 additional households or extra households for compensate for refusals and non-availability of respondents and so on. So then we did the main survey interview. So the main survey, the survey questionnaire had 2 sections. The first part to obtain information about the household, and the second part to obtain information individual level information. So first we did the household section of the interview with the household head or another household representative. During that stage, we list down all the household members in a household roster, and we randomly selected the member who is in the age of over 15 to conduct the individual section of the interview. So as you saw in the previous slide, all the stage of the selection in the survey were done in a random way to make sure that this is a representative study with a calculatable probability. So we used the selection probabilities calculated from those selection probabilities to weight our data set. So all the indicators, the estimates that Gaini will present you in the coming slides are weighted, and the survey is representative. So finally, in the next slide, we can see the coverage of our sample household. These are based on the GPS location we captured during the survey, like using the CAPI devices. So a detailed methodology note will be available on our website also. So the link will be shared soon after in the chat. Thanks, Annie.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tharaka. So I'll now walk you through our findings, starting off with the state of internet access in use in Sri Lanka. We looked at internet use from two different lenses. One was household connectivity, the second was individual connectivity. So we find that 61% of households had an active internet connection in their houses this year. This translates to 3.9 million households. Meanwhile, if we look at it from an individual lens, 44% of individuals aged 15 and above were online. Now, Sri Lanka is a primarily mobile-first market, as are most other developing countries. 55% of households, that's about 90% of households with internet connectivity, said that they used mobile phones to connect to the internet. Meanwhile, just 3% of households indicated that they had used fiber or ADSL connectivity, a number that we should be looking to increase, particularly on the fiber end. Now, the pandemic has changed the connectivity landscape. If you look at the box on the left that we have here, you'll see that 12% of households obtained a new internet connection due to COVID-19. 9% bought their first internet connection for their household, whereas 3% bought an additional connection to supplement their existing one. A further 12% didn't necessarily change their connection, but changed their existing internet packages to meet the new needs of their households. Now, the pandemic has clearly brought people online. We see that 1.6 million individuals over the age of 15 came online in 2020 and 2021. 31% of these people, that's about 500,000 people, said it was due to a need brought about due to the pandemic. Note here that we're only talking about the people over the age of 15. Young children who came online, for example, are not counted in this number. But when we look at who did come online from a household lens, we see that a majority of the households that got connected were those with school-aged children. So if you think of our entire population, we would likely see that the proportion or the number of people who came online would be even greater. We will see the impacts of kids coming online and participating in education later on in our presentation. Now, despite people coming online, we see that internet use in Sri Lanka is still relatively low. Often, when you look at empirical evidence, you see that internet use is correlated with GNI per capita. So the better off people in a country are, the higher the internet use is. But Sri Lanka is an outlier in this regard. Internet use in Sri Lanka, which stood at 44%, was below that of countries with a lower GNI per capita, such as India and Nigeria. Again, these are numbers, the internet use numbers are ones that we are drawing from the research that have been done by our partner organizations. Now, though internet use has grown in Sri Lanka, it's happened at a slower pace than many of these other countries. So in the past, Sri Lanka actually had more internet users as a proportion of its population than India and Nigeria, but these countries have grown at a much faster rate. So internet users in India has grown at about 25% annually, Since 2017, Nigeria's has grown at 16% annually, whereas Sri Lanka's has just been at 6%, which is what has really led us to be overtaken in this regard. Now we take a look to see who it was connected, and you'll see that internet use is lower for certain groups. You'll see that it's lower amongst rural populations, such as what you see over here. You'll see that it's lower amongst the elderly, those with less education, as well as people from lower socioeconomic groups. However, what we're seeing is that some of these gaps are changing. So let's take gender for an example. In 2018, when we did a similar survey, we found that women were 34% less likely to be online than men. But this number has shrunk since 2018 to 7% as more and more women have come online. So it's we're happy to see that some of these gaps are closing. Unfortunately, however, not all these gaps have reduced to such an extent. The urban-rural gap in connectivity, for example, is still fairly high at 19%, seeing little change over the past few years. So it's clear that despite the progress made over the past couple of years, many are still unconnected in Sri Lanka. So if we look at households, we can see that 2.2 million households still lack connectivity. Meanwhile, if you look at it from a population lens, 9.2 million people over the age of 15 are still unconnected. And people have all different reasons for not being connected. When we asked our non-users why they were unconnected, the most cited response was that around a lack of awareness. So this was the same issue that we saw in 2018, which is what you'll see in red over here on the chart. Though the proportion of people citing this as the main reason why they're not connected has fallen, we're also seeing some other interesting trends over time. As awareness has increased, there are more people who are saying they're not getting online just because they're not interested. We're also seeing non-users increasingly citing things like the lack of skills, the lack of access to devices, and cost as constraints to use. Now we focus on the impacts of technology, impacts of COVID on different parts of people's lives. So the second part of our presentation with a focus on the mediating role that technology played. We'll start with education. So as we all know, COVID-19 led to unforeseen school closures, and not only in Sri Lanka, but across the world. We were able to ascertain how many school-going children had access to education services during the first few months of school closures in 2020. We focused on children in primary and secondary education, so school-going children. We didn't focus on students in tertiary education. What we found here is that 85% of school-going children had some form of formal education services provided to them at this time. Now, we can see that Sri Lanka did far better than India in this regard, which is another country in which we did the study. This is good, but before we get too excited, we have to remember that the bar that we're setting here is quite a low one. Another way to look at this is to say that there were 15% of children who had absolutely no access to formal education services during the first few months of the lockdown, through digitally mediated means or not. So that itself is a problem despite us doing better than India. Now, the 85% who got education got it through two means, through schools and tuition classes. 81% got education from schools, 37% got it from tuition classes. What this also means is that a third of children got education from both schools and tuition classes, which really does speak to the centrality of tuition within our education system. Now, whether or not children received education at this time also depended largely on the educational status of the household head. Other factors didn't seem to play that much of a role. Girls, for example, were as likely to receive education as boys. Those in rural areas were as likely to receive education as those in urban areas. But as we'll see later on in the presentation, the gaps really began to show when we started looking at certain elements of the educational experience, and I'll touch on that later. Internet connectivity was a key factor in facilitating remote education. 76% of households over here with school-aged children had internet connectivity. If a household with school-aged children had an active internet connection, it resulted in children having access to education 90% of the time. Now, we aren't in a position to comment on whether the children actually learned during school closures, but we can talk about the variety of channels through which children received education. So half of the school-aged children, as you'll see here on the top, said that they had participated in live online classes at some point in the early months of the school closures. Meanwhile, 54% said that they had assignments sent to their smartphones or computers through channels such as email or WhatsApp. 60% said that they got physical notes and assignments sent to them, sent to their homes. Now, the 85% of these children who did receive education, we can see received education through multiple channels. Now, feedback is a really important part of learning. And what we're seeing through our research is that not everyone got feedback from teachers during their remote learning experience. So only 48% of enrolled children, or 57% of students who had received education, received feedback from their teachers at some point. Now, remember earlier how we showed that access to education numbers were roughly the same across different groups, but this is one of the few areas in which experiences differ. So fewer students outside the Western province and from poorer households actually receive feedback from teachers. What this slide shows is that having access to education didn't necessarily translate to a positive learning experience for all. Nearly 60% of households that received education said that they were either dissatisfied or extremely dissatisfied with their experience. We also asked households about the challenges they faced during remote education. We had them citing a different series of challenges, including those that were technology-based, behavior-based, as well as school-based. Nearly half mentioned that poor connectivity and high data costs were constraints to their educational experience being optimal. Now, we'll pick up on this poor signal issue once again, and we'll see that this was particularly an issue to children's educational experience outside the Western province and in rural areas. If you look at the right side over here of the slide, you'll see that only 22% of households in urban areas in the Western province said that signal was a constraint to education. But if you look at rural households over here, outside the Western province, the numbers were more than double at 56%. While talking about the impacts of education, it's also important for us to think about how people worked during lockdowns. So only 22% of those who had a job during the first lockdown engaged in remote work. It's worth mentioning here that the number in Sri Lanka is roughly double that of India, where we saw just 10% engaging in remote work. Now, those who were more educated and from higher socioeconomic backgrounds were far more likely to work from home. We saw women who were employed were slightly more likely to work from home than their male counterparts. Interestingly, the numbers on the top right-hand side here help us dispel the idea a little bit that internet connectivity is a necessary condition for remote work. While there were some people who didn't own smartphones and didn't use the internet, who actually worked from home, which may hint that there were people in low-tech jobs who also worked from home. This is confirmed when we asked our respondents what the biggest challenges they faced were when they worked from home. The most cited challenge that they said was finding raw material was difficult. Then the second most cited challenge that they mentioned was that the cost of phone calls was too high. Now, this was greater than the proportion of people who said that their internet charges were too high. So that may give you a sense of the how high-tech the technology they were using were. Also worth noting is that 16% over here said that they found it challenging to maintain their work-life balance. while those 16% said that it was difficult to maintain their work-life balance, there were also a large portion of other people who felt that it gave them better balance. So 54% said that they had more time to spend with family, 42% said that they had lower costs associated with transportation, and 32% said that they had more time for leisure. There are also some hints that work from home may be here to stay, at least for now. We're seeing that the experiences of those who worked from home at the time of lockdown versus the experiences of people who were working from home at the time of survey implementation this year. So roughly a third of people who had a job and who were working from home during the lockdown said that they had returned to their physical workplaces full-time. Another third of people said that they worked from home either full-time or on a hybrid basis, and the other third were unfortunately unemployed. Now, naturally, as we talk about work, it's also important that we talk about household income. I'll go through this section quite quickly. But what we're seeing is that the lockdown has led to large hits to household incomes to a large proportion of the population. Over 80% of households experienced income loss during the lockdown. As expected, poorer households were the most impacted, as were households with less educated household heads. We also wanted to get a sense of if the income shocks faced during the lockdown persisted outside lockdown periods. So the question here is, did household incomes bounce back to pre-pandemic levels? Unfortunately, it seems not. Incomes at the time of survey implementation this year were below pre-pandemic levels in 74% of the households. We now move on to talking about how households accessed food during the first lockdown in March 2020. So most households accessed food and groceries through local grocery shops and through mobile vendors. Only 2% of households used online platforms to obtain their food and groceries. If we were to dissect this 2% further, we find that platform use for food delivery was concentrated within very niche groups. So if you look at the urban-rural section over here, you'll see that 9% of those in urban areas used online platforms, but only 1% in rural areas did. If you look at the socioeconomic classification here, it's quite telling, where you find 25% of those in socioeconomic category A, which is really the richest top sliver of households, they tended to use it. But even when you go down to the next rung, which is SECB, it falls dramatically to 4%. Now, a recurring question, as you may realize for us, is whether these changes during lockdowns are lockdown specific or whether it's a sign of longer term change. We see that the use of these platforms for food delivery was a stopgap measure for many. 58% of those who used online platforms for food delivery during the lockdown said that they didn't use it after, largely because they said they didn't have a need to do it anymore and they could just go to the shops physically and purchase whatever goods that they needed. Now, up to now, we've been talking about the use of platforms for food delivery specifically, but now we move on to talking about the use of platforms from a broader lens. So in this section, we focus on a whole series of platforms, those that they were used to buy goods and services, obtain transport and taxis, booking appointments for accommodation, micro-work, and so on. Now, at best, you can see only about 30% were aware of these types of platforms. Even then, we're looking at, say, goods and products like e-commerce sites and transportation and taxi services. At the bottom of the chart, you'll see that awareness of platforms for things like hired help and micro-work or freelance working was much, much lower. Now, it's clear to us that awareness doesn't always translate to use. So we'll take the example of goods and products, for example. We'll see that 31% said that they knew of their existence, but only 3% used it during the lockdown. So that conversion ratio, once again, isn't really seen. There were two main reasons for non-use of platforms when we asked those who didn't use the internet platforms why they didn't use it. First, the perceived lack of need, which is what we saw in the food delivery section as well. But the second one was something that we didn't come across earlier, which is around the lack of skills. So they said they just don't know how to use the platforms. So that's likely something to focus on in the future as well. Now we move on to one of our final sections, and that's on digital government. We asked our respondents if they had used the internet to access government websites. We found that only 13% of the population aged 15 and above had accessed these government websites. That's roughly 30% of internet users. Note here that we only asked them about accessing government websites, not the use of services. If we had asked such a question, these numbers would likely have been even lower. There has been some growth in the use of government website access over the past 4 years, but the growth has been fairly marginal, unfortunately. You may also recall, as in the other sections, that it's the younger, more educated populations from higher socioeconomic groups that access these government websites. This could, of course, lead to a conversation about the need to increase awareness, increasing how user-friendly these websites are, particularly making sure that they're optimized for access from mobile devices, and so on. The final thing that we'd like to pick up on, given the COVID theme, is the use of contact tracing mechanisms. We focused specifically on online check-in systems popularized in countries such as Singapore very early into the pandemic and then replicated in countries outside. So in Sri Lanka, that includes check-in systems like Stay Safe that has been developed by ICTA. 22% of mobile owners, that's about 17% of the population, have stated that they have used these mobile-based systems for this purpose. 6% said that they use QR code-based check-ins, whereas 19% said that they have used SMS-based systems. It's worth noting that at the other side of the spectrum, what you see here in white, light gray, is that nearly 50% of mobile owners seem to lack awareness about these mechanisms. So again, perhaps an indication that greater effort needs to be made to spread awareness of this. I will stop here. I hope this has given you a decent overview on the state of connectivity and its role in facilitating access to different types of services. Slides will be online on the website shortly. We will put the link to the slides also on the chat. Thank you, everyone. Prof, over to you.
Thank you, Gaini and Taraka. I should have said that was a joint presentation. Taraka, our statistician. This has been a challenging survey, as they mentioned, navigating delays and lockdowns and so on. So let's get started on the second part of this, which is to bring in the insights of the panel and hopefully give the media and others who are in the audience a sense of the kinds of areas they should be designing their questions for and to whom they should direct them. My first question is to Mr. Oshada Senanayake, the obvious question, which is we don't like to be behind India on anything. What are we going to do about it?
Thank you, Professor Samarajiv. And in fact, I should commend Learn Asia for coming up with this opportune report in terms of the digital landscape during the COVID pandemic. Of course, in terms of the neighbors, there's no love lost. So I'm with you on that. But let me give you some interesting perspective on why we are here, why we are behind, right? And I'll refer back to your report as well, which I went in detail. Now, let's just take two countries, right, that you looked at, India as well as let's take Nigeria. If you look at the internet penetration statistics, let's go back a couple of years, right? It's very important to look at the trend curve over here. So if you look at 2017, 18, and 19, for India, the internet penetration have grown across from approximate 34.4% in 2017 to 2018. It has gone across to staggering 38%. not staggering, but it's a good step. And then 2019 has gone into the staggering step of 48%. And then in 2021, as you all have stated, it has gone to 47%. There's a minor difference between the statistics. In my report says it's 45% approximately, but that doesn't matter. But if you see, there's been a concerted trend that you see, which has been an upward positive trend. If you look at again Nigeria from 2017, right? If you look at Nigeria, it has been at 43% of internet penetration, and 2018 it has grown up to slightly to 43.75%, and in 2019 to 46.5%, and eventually 2020 early or mid, it has gone up to 49.1%. Now my stats say for 2021 Nigeria is at 51.4%, but that's okay. Again, let's take 54%. Now let's come back to Sri Lanka's situation, right? From 2017, our internet penetration statistics is stagnated on 34.11%. So in 2017, we are at about 34%. 2018, we are at 34%. 2019, we are at about 34%. And come 2020-21, well, we are at 44%, right? Now, if you look at the trend curve analysis, well, we've caught up very fast across the last 2 years. And I'll tell how important, as when you started off, you said how important policymaking is, Professor. I mean, I'll tell you why this has happened. Let's take first our tax regime that we've had. Sri Lanka has, across multiple governments, they've looked at the telecommunications sector as a taxation haven, right? It has not been looked at on a pragmatic and holistic view, that these are industry that has to be empowered and catalyzed to ensure that they can ensure the basic piece of infrastructure, which is connectivity, which is important for any country's digital transformation, has to be set in place. Now let's go back to 2016. I'm not politicizing this, by the way, right? I can go back more as well. If you look at the taxation regime that we had to encounter, even as citizens, right? We were paying a staggering 49.67% of tax as telecommunication users. 2016. 2017, we were still paying 49.67% of tax. Then 2018, it became a bit better. It came down to 37.7%. And also 2019, it holds sway and it was at 37.7%. But still, Professor, you would agree with me that if you look at other emerging countries, there's still a staggering rate of taxation, which is going to have a negative impact on adoption of internet, adoption of telecommunication services by subscribers. You cannot literally pay approximate 50% of tax on your services. Well, we might have macro environmental other challenges as a nation, but that doesn't mean that you can put so much of brunt on the telecommunication front. Absolutely no. So I completely disagree. And this has been done by consecutive governments, right? So come 2019 again, we faced this challenge. So the first thing we want to look at was me being part of these reforms and the transformation of policymaking. The first step we took was to ensure that these tax rates were completely cut down. Again, there could be a lot more arguments whether how prudent that was. But for me, wearing the hat of the digital transformation, right? The digital transformation, I believe that's a correct step. And we cut down the overall taxation to 22.6% back again. And if you take the data rate, the internet rate, it has come down. It's up to 10.2%. Today, the effective rate on internet services is 10.2%, Professor, right? Now, this is where we need to focus on a long-term policy that has to factor in all of these nuances. Now, let's take the other side. I was just explaining this on the consumer side. Now, let's take the telecommunication sector side again. Again, I mean, we put not so good tax regimes in place. For example, we have a tax on the telecommunication towers. Now, when we want to accelerate connectivity, how are we justifying a taxation on every tower that the telecommunications sector invests on? Right? We cannot do that. Right? Again, I'm not being completely oblivious to the other challenges we face as a country. But I mean, from a policy making, from a technology perspective or telecommunication perspective, this is absolutely not aligned. Now, on top of that, this was aggravated, right, and compounded by the serious litigation situation the industry faced a couple of years back, right? We faced the regulator as well as the industry was completely fragmented. In 2019, there were 16 Supreme Court cases that the regulator as well as the industry was embroiled in. Now, what did that mean? the complete regulation and the management of spectrum and the awarding of spectrum that is required to manage quality of service and to expand 4G and connectivity was at an absolute deadlock. It was an absolute deadlock, Professor, for 3 years. Now this, I'm glad that you all have put out these statistics that really articulates well back with this information I'm giving, right? And this is how the telecommunication industry has literally stagnated with that impetus that we had, that fantastic impetus. I mean, we had the highest 4G penetration rate and the mobile penetration rate in Southeast Asia some time back. We were the first to start off 5G trials, but look where we are today. Maldives has gone ahead in 5G, right? India has gone ahead. Bangladesh has gone ahead, and then it breaks my heart, right, as a guy coming from the private sector to see this. So I think, but however, the good news is, let's go back to the statistics this report states, we are at a 44%, and that's an uptake of 11% across the last 2 years. And I think that's recovery. That's recovery for me. And I think for the last 2 years, respective of the challenges that the black swan of the COVID-19 has put across Sri Lanka onto, we've held sway in terms of ensuring that we had a conservative, or rather a pragmatic tax policy. And I'm glad that this time around on the budget, that tax policy has been untouched, literally. So I think I'll give an example how this has worked. I'd like to take an example of the International Telecommunication Union latest global benchmarking report for 2021. I think it sums up our decisions, whether it's right or wrong, is based on this report. Today on the latest ITU report, this is not our local cooked up information or statistics. This is the ITU. Sri Lanka has come to the top 20 in terms of the most affordable fixed broadband services. We are on the 20th rank. And ITU has noted it as one of the most record-making rankings that a country has come through far. It keeps getting better. I think the earlier, I think Gayani talked about also the cost issue. For mobile broadband, we've come to the 13th rank across 190 countries for most affordable internet. And it keeps getting better for voice services. We, for the first time in history, cracked through to the top 10. We are the 7th. Only 6 countries are ahead of us. So I believe this is not something we can bask in the glory of this, but I think we need to continue, Professor. We need to continue to basically ensure that we come to the top 10 in terms of even data rates. And in fact, if you look at the fixed broadband penetration across the last 2 years, in fact, from last year, early 2020, the fixed broadband connections was at about 1.8 million connections. Today, as of today, we are talking about 2.6 million fixed broadband connections. SLT, as the national service provider, for example, is running through aggressive port expansion plan led by the regulator. And we are looking at, by 2023, enabling 2 million fiber to home ports. Today, we are well on par. We've activated approximately 1 million fiber to home ports, for example. Just early last year, our mobile broadband, again, it syncs up fantastically well with your statistics. Last year, our mobile broadband connections was 12.7 million. Today, it's at a staggering 17.9 million, a growth of year on year, over 5 million. So I think these are examples of, Professor, on why we need to ensure that we catalyze the industry. Now comes the question that, again, Gayani mentioned about rural connectivity. Right? Rural connectivity is not a local phenomena. This is a challenge that's been faced by literally the whole of the other countries. Now, hence the reason the ITU again has a Connect 2030 agenda that is aligned with literally the UNGA's sustainable goals, right? And data is one of them. So again, if you look at it for the last 11 years, Sri Lanka has not invested as the governments, right, on rural connectivity. So how are you basically expecting a private sector environment to just keep on investing on areas that doesn't make financial sense? We have to understand these are listed organizations. Of course, there has to be shareholder value that has to be created. But then again, where does the role of governments come in, right? So unfortunately, again, the concept of the Universal Service Obligation Fund that is continued by literally all countries through the regulators, that fund in Sri Lanka is generated by the telecom development charge, which means from all the international calls that terminate in Sri Lanka, there's a particular revenue that's made, and 50% of that goes into the treasury, or rather the government, of course, and 50% could be retained by the regulator to reinvest back on the industry for this key important piece of rural connectivity. Now, again, it has never happened for a decade. Now, that's where we've started this off again on the get-go. I started this on early 2020. And today, the Government Sannivedana project, or we call it the Connect Sri Lanka project, is cutting across. Today, as we speak, we've started working in 7 districts. By end of December, we are launching 3 more districts. That was our target. And we are investing 50% of the capital expenditure that's required for these towers. Now, this was a missing piece, Professor. Now, on top of that, all of these towers are literally today manufactured in Sri Lanka. We are saving close to approximately 2 billion rupees of foreign expenditure, whereas we've created a new industry as well. And these are potential, since you mentioned South Africa. Today, some of the manufacturers are already exporting to the likes of South Africa as we speak. So I think policy making is key, Professor. It has to be sustained. I think irrespective of whether regimes change or not, I think the country level policy making has to be consistent. I think that's where we've gone wrong, and that's where we've basically fallen behind, I would say. And I think we've taxed, or we put too much negative impact on the industry in itself to sort out other macro environmental challenges of the economy. So I think it has to be a checks and balance. And I think this time around, as I mentioned, that's why I'm glad that we've held sway, and we haven't changed that tax regime. And I'm proudly stating today, for the next year, almost all the telecommunication operators have doubled their investment. So that's the assurance that we've given by a very stable policy making front, right? I mean, that's where we need to go as a country. And I think, again, past is past. Let's ensure that now we leapfrog again ahead of the others. I'm with you on that. So I think I'm I'm absolutely confident that if we have this top end support, and if we continue to ensure that these policies are continued across the next 5 to 7 years, I think we can springboard back again ahead of the curve, Professor.
Thank you very much for a very comprehensive answer. I think the media will have a lot of things to expand on, given that basis. Mr. Ilangovan, when you look at the relative contributions of the state education system on one side and the tuition providers on the other side, what are the conclusions you take, and how would you see you getting ready for another lockdown-like situation, which we hope won't happen, but we have to be ready?
Yeah, thanks, Professor. And actually, at the outset, I thank the presenters for the excellent presentation. And in fact, the division of the sampling from the western province and the other rest of the country shows how that with the GDP, the wealthy, and the other rest of the provinces, there's one. And try to answer your question, Professor, even starting from when we face this COVID situation, I can thank the head of the state, His Excellency, and all the honorable ministers, Honorable Dallas Alapremon, the first one who really handled the situation at the Education Ministry, then followed from Professor Honorable Piris, then Honorable Dinesh Kunawardena, and now it's led by the Honorable Susil Premenda for the reform, and we are taking steps. And as for the provincial concern, the northern province, at the outset, we were enthusiastic to get on this situation. There is a global issue. As a national and the provincial issues, we were encouraged to get into this situation. Therefore, this digital learning and the distance learning mode. And in fact, we are on a comfort zone. Even during this coping strategy, we were just had in the previous time, which facilitate our appendages to cope up the present situation as well. When we move to this learning material development, the digital mode, and we have trained the teachers. Initially, we have this blended education, and now all the classes we are focusing in these schools facilitated with the digital learning, and as our telecom providers have been mentioned about this connectivity, we face that challenge because initially we only started with 40% coverage for this distance and the digital learning mode. Then gradually, when we had some assessment on the exam basis, it's grown up to 80%. It shows the parents' commitment towards that. And the teachers, when there's no connectivity, teachers take the children to a point where they have the connections and have the lessons in that particular point. So that's the encouragement. That is one. Then there's a competition among the parents now, how we can cope the situation and educate them in the situation, even when they are focusing some other more challenges or lockdown in the future as well. But presently, the tuition centers, since the most of the children are actually depend on the system, are more towards the system, formal system. There's other encouragement to the teachers and the system now. And particularly, you can see the last performance, one Madhu zone, which is close in the Manna district, it came first in the exams. Similarly, when we had this urban center, we have some issues. But it is, device and the, facilities to encourage this education. Even parents first still ask us. Earlier, you said don't give mobile phone to children. Now you are encouraging them to give and share these phones and the devices. That is regulatory mechanism. And there are other issues. The socio-emotional learning is other field we are entering into, where most of the children and the education teachers are more stressed towards this system and focusing these exams keep on postponing. So we must address that issue as well. So in the present context, actually we have every stakeholder should join hands, and other facilities in the sampling we must address that issue. Since it's a global issue, we got some sort of a global support even in this aspect. Most of the agencies, those are all students and all the stakeholders who are living outside, they actually share the experience in their countries particularly, and also expand the services. Even for a not connectivity, we are expand the services through pen drive, CDs, and the soft copies and circulate among the hearts inside of the heart system. So in that we are encouraged. And again, the challenge is remain because most of the rural area, in the northern province, there are islands within the islands. So with that area, I think that need to be extended. Even we are engaged by the budget support program, they are going to have the connectivity and the optic laying on these areas. Definitely that we can use area. And other things is we earlier entered an agreement with the telecom on the M platform. That is facilitated, but due to this COVID situation that was suspended, now we can restart those areas where we can enter into the areas and we can expand our services to the children. And other thing is now with the reform, we are going to expand the services through CRC, that is Community Resource Centers, learning centers in the centers where we can grow the children in respect to the schools. So the children from different schools can come to one place as a group, as a class. They can have the lessons in the classes. Similarly, we have starting some community centers where the community they themselves arrange this sort of facilities with the available connectivity and the devices, providing the opportunity for the children. So we are facilitating those education learning in the province. As a whole, we are sharing the experience through learning experience through other provinces as well in the medium wise. But in our province, Tamil medium, we are developing the sessions. For singular students, we are borrowing from the adjoining provinces and the Blind Ministry. So that also facilitating this learning. So any questions, I'm looking forward to answering.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ilangovan. Thank you for this, again, very broad response. If I could go to Zulfa, and here I'm going to be asking you to stay somewhere in the range of 5 minutes. If you look at the numbers from other countries, we've seen this remote activities, e-commerce, food delivery, all these things rocketing up. And I know that your business has in fact sort of transformed into a food delivery business. But from the data, what we see is a sort of slightly different picture. I was surprised by it. What do you make of it, Zulfa?
So Professor, it depends on what data we are looking at. Remember when the curfew when we had that lockdown, the first lockdown was a very hard lockdown and actually no activities took place, right? So in fact, our revenues went to zero. Obviously we had a delivery business, we had a ride hailing business, everything went to zero. And it took us about 3-4 weeks for us to, get the required permits to start operating. And it really happened after the Sinhala Avruddha in 2020. So it was a gradual pickup. And I can tell you the pickup, though it was gradual, it sort of ramped up really fast. Of course, we worked with Satosa, we worked with Litrogas, right? And I think getting the essential services was the requirement at the beginning. But I can tell you now, the volumes have more than doubled, right? And we are seeing a lot of people now using food delivery services and grocery services delivered to their home. So I think obviously we've opened up a new set of users as well. We see that, for example, when we look at our ride hailing business, we see a lot of bus goers have now switched to taxis now, right? And essentially we haven't yet seen the taxi goers still coming back, because a lot of them are now still working from home, and we are looking forward for them to come in and then essentially have our supply ready for that services. yeah, I hope I answered that question.
Yeah, good. Hopefully, we'll get some more questions from the media, or I will ask you more questions in that part. But I want to really privilege their opportunities. Karin, if you could unmute.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. You've done work on remote working. And as Gayani showed us, there's been a bit more remote working here than in India as a percentage. But when I look at the numbers, what I see is it's mostly SCCA and SCCB. What about all this government of servants who have stayed at home and so on and so forth? What's your read about this picture with regard to remote working?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for a great report that everyone was looking forward to. Yes, definitely. Even our own studies are showing that the majority of people who could switch to work from home were actually in the high income categories and in certain job types that would allow them to make that switch. While as in the lower income groups, it's just not possible because they don't have jobs that you can do using remote devices, and they're also not accessing services that way. So when it came to the public sector, I'm not sure how the public sector got captured in your sex, but as a work device, what we were finding in most, the few of the remote areas that we managed to have access to, is that yes, they did say work from home, but they always had a skeletal staff that actually manned the offices. And people were coming into those places. And we know of cases where, like in the DS divisions, in quite a few areas, there were outbreaks of COVID because people were coming and they could not shut down particular services. We also found that they negotiated with each other using WhatsApp quite a bit, which is also quite different for the government. And they weren't really going by the vertical divisions and needing clearances, but they were working a little bit more informally, but they really managed the crisis. It wasn't that the other services were operating at the same speed. But we also have really good examples, like in the fisheries sector, where they did go digital. And they were actually issuing licenses. So the fishing was one of the sectors that they didn't completely shut down. It was only shut down for short periods of time. So you had to get a license to go out, and not license, actually this permission slip to go out and fish. That is actually available online. But also the way they worked was very much in their networks. You call them and you say you need this, and they say, okay, we'll furnish it for you. So from what I'm reading, or we are reading of it, it's that it's because they never went completely out of their offices, because they did actually keep some services online, and particular things, definitely like the education sector, health sector, they did work. And they were actually doing different things to try and accommodate people's needs. Sometimes they weren't on digital spaces. For example, the health sector had a way of getting mobile medicine. They had a mobile unit that would deliver medicine so that people were not coming to hospital, but they were still getting their medicine. The zonal officers, just as Mr. Lanka has expressed in the Northern Province, lots of them tried in very, very different ways from wherever they were to actually provide particular services. So internet connectivity is bad, or children cannot get online. So they were actually doing smart boards, they were doing information packs. So they were still actually managing to do certain functions. The thing is, lots of it was not, I believe, not done through using digital services. So that is probably where that doesn't show up as much.
Thank you. So now it's the time for the audience. I've got one gentleman asking to pose a question on chat. I will call upon him first. But for everybody else, please understand that the raise hand function is one of the wonderful features of these Zoom conferences. And if you do raise your hands, I can see it, and I will call you in order that you raise your hand. So, Mr. Michael, would you like to raise your question, or would you like me to raise? Oh, you're saying you cannot and that you want me to ask on your behalf. Okay, let me ask on his behalf. I believe this would be, well, it's a question to the panel. I'm reading it out. You can look at it, the chat box yourself. I'm talking to the panelists. One of the negative impacts of children being given access to mobile phones for e-learning activities is that they are exposed to some of the bad things, such as gaming, porn, etc., which resulted in behavior changes as well. In some cases, it has become an addiction as well. How can we ensure that this facility is not leading to disaster when it comes to our young generation? Thanks. That's from Mr. Michael. So I think Mr. Ilangovan, if you want to take a run at that, and then maybe we'll come to.
Professor, yes. In fact, we are just concerned about this. I mean, when you open to this child to the internet, the bullying and gaming and kissing, all these portions. The first thing is we are creating awareness at the school level and the parents level. And children are not allowed to learn in an isolated area from in places where they are just secure. And also some area where with the providers, we are requested to have some regulatory mechanism where the children are not open to those areas, which have some firewall in between. And the first part is the peer group pressure also extended to the safe. And I mean, our parents are more careful than when we are seeing this Indian related experience in this. And I mean, parents are looking care, taking some extra care on this. That's what I can assure, Professor. Thanks, Mr. Mekka, for your question.
Yeah.
Can I add
Mr. Senanayaka?
Yeah, please,
Okay, Karin, why don't you go? And then
Go ahead.
come to.
Okay, so actually I agree that there is this fear about all these things and students being exposed to it, which is actually why so many mothers have been burdened with supervising their children because they don't want to have children who are online on their own. So one of the other side effects of this is that it increased the burden also on women, especially because unfortunately it's women who had took the greater responsibility to supervise children. So they are now finding that they have to spend time with their children online, that they cannot leave their children. One, the children are not there sometimes, they're gone somewhere else and not following the class, but also because there was fear. I think your survey also showed that there was distrust of the internet and what you can do with it. And definitely you can see that in the amount of supervision that parents put in, which also might be the reason that the lower income groups did also not spend as much attention to the education, was because they couldn't also manage the supervision, not only because they didn't have the devices.
Right, thank you, Mr. Senanayaka. But before, just let me make one announcement, which is please raise your hand, give me the raise hand signal if you want to ask questions. But this also includes our panel. The panel, you can ask questions of each other. I think they'll be very rich questions. Mr. Senraga, you want to take that question?
Absolutely, Professor. I'd love to. I mean, this is a very important question that has been posed to the regulator as well, in terms of the impact, the negative impact on our student base, the children demography. Now, what I need to state here is, again, I think there's a lot of awareness that we need to make around. I think in this day and age, blockade of games or blockade of sites is not going to be prudent, and it's not going to be sustainable. Because as we all know, the internet is compared to a 50 billion lane highway. Now, imagine we block these games. I mean, these are, Generation C's and the Generation Alphas of the likes, right? And they're going to put in VPNs and get along on that. And that's not a solution. Now my solution is there is a technological solution to it. Now, as the previous speaker Karin said, I don't think we need to physically keep on looking at a child's screen. I mean, there are mechanisms. I'll give an example. I mean, we've done awareness videos as a regulator on this, and we've done a lot of awareness on media on this. And I think it's also, sorry for saying this, it's sometimes ignorance of parents as well, where you just hand over a phone when you go home to the child. Now, what happens is, do you regulate, do you create a different account, for example, on that? So we all know that we have OTT applications like WhatsApp, Viber, and all that, various different groups and various different things are shared, and possibly even adult content, right? And the issue is, when you go hand over that phone to the child, that child has complete exposure to all of that information on that phone. Now, yes, I agree there are socioeconomic conditions where the parent's phone has to be used by the child, but then still there are mechanisms. Now, take, for example, the Google Family Link app. For example, it's just one click away, right? You install that, you can dictate exactly which sites your child can go on to, right? You can completely set up the smart filtering where they cannot go into pornographic sites, for example. Number two, you can control what games they can download from the app stores, right? So this whole issue of games doesn't come to light. Number three, you can go in and moderate even YouTube content. Now, the next issue is, Professor, the content on YouTube, right? There are crazy amount of information out there, and there are pop-ups of advertisements that's coming because these are all clickbaits, right? People are running a game trying to make dollars by creating literally unwanted content. Now, you can even moderate that YouTube content, for example, based on your child's age. So if your child is a 7-year-old, you can set it at that point and all the advertising stops and that content is only given to that child. So for example, if it's a 7-year-old child, it will only load up YouTube Kids, for example. If you have an 11-year-old, you can do the next notch, right? And these are all moderated then. So I think it's about self-regulation. It's about awareness, Professor. And I don't think this whole adage of trying to put blockades is not going to work out. And again, let's admit it, right? Our children were forced to home overnight. And on top of it, it was again compounded by our teachers completely going on strike. So what are our kids supposed to do? I've got a 6-year-old and 11-year-old. Look, I mean, these are questions that these youngsters put at us. I mean, they can't go out. We say it's dengue, right? They get on to games. We say, don't touch it, it's screen time. So I think there are technological mechanisms that the parents should use, right? I mean, I think one is basically, if you look at different demographics, it's non-awareness, possibly because they would have put all their savings to get a mobile phone. They don't know how to download app. But if you look at the urban suburban class, I mean, you get the best iPhone and give it to your child, right? And then complain they're addicted to games. So on any Samsung or even iPhone, you can manage screen time as well. You can dictate screen time for each app. Say you want to give your child, okay, 15 minutes of gaming time, you can set it up, right? I mean, why do you want to keep running behind the child and then say, look, you can't control it? So I think technology in it itself is the answer to this problem. It's about awareness. And I think we should all keep on raising further awareness. And I think the parents over here has a responsibility to adapt and oblige as well, I believe.
It's a very refreshing answer to hear from a regulator. I'm very happy to be living in a country with people with such attitudes. Shirani Elasinghe from Sarodaya Fusion is in the audience, I can see. And they're doing a lot of work on digital literacy. I wonder, are you willing to make some contribution about raising awareness with young people, Shirani? Well, apparently not. I have two hands up. I'll go to Sudharan Perampalam. Yes, go ahead, Haran.
Thanks, Professor. My question is, there's an alarming percentage of 2% only having access to online platform with regard to food delivery. So when it's in the first lockdown, yes, this supermarket failed and they are not prepared at that time, so that Pygmies and Ubers came into action. But later, during the third lockdown, supermarket were prepared and they are giving through their app, they are serving to a larger base of customers. So supermarkets app also counted as a mean of online platform. In that case, will that 2% will be higher when it comes to people who are accessing food through online platforms?
Seems like a methods question for Gayani.
Yeah, thanks, Haran. So let me actually just we have a slide to explain this, if you'll give me just a moment to find it. But what we do find is that 11% of people used, sorry, I think 11, just give me a moment. 11% of people, I believe, got food and groceries from supermarkets, and 11% of them used websites and applications to obtain food. So my sense is that the online platform number and the supermarket app use number would sync up together. So it is a subset of the other.
Right. I have another question from Sujata Gamage.
Thank you. This is from Sri Langovan. Listening to the other day, I was at a fusion event where they launched this beautiful program, a really fun program to educate children about the internet. It's called Internet Awesome. And I think Facebook has some programs. And but it has been, and I was listening to Mr. Oshada Sennaika talk about all these tools available for parents. But what we have not seen, what I have not seen, and I'm asking Sri Lankans whether they have seen anything from the government about how to use the internet safely and how to use the internet for teachers. It's been now nearly 2 years, but next March we would have had 2 years of this experience. And I saw an publication by the government on internet guidance, I think about 2 months ago, but it did not have anything on internet safety. So has the provinces done their own pamphlets, or don't we have any information from the center or from the provinces for the parents? Because this seems like a critical, crucial piece of information that the parents should get. Thank you.
Mr. Langovan?
Yes, thanks, Kami. Actually, formally, we have not had any such of instruction from any authorities, as I earlier mentioned, but we have the provincial level with the intervention of the university, YAPTA. We have set some code for this internet security, and we have circulated that among our teachers. And that can be circulated, and we can make some initiative with the higher up, and we can get it formalized.
Mr. Sennaika, perhaps you have something to add to this?
Yes, Professor. So I think as a regulator, if you go onto our Twitter, if you go onto our social media, because social media is where it gets basically shared across. So if you go through, we've done a tremendous amount of awareness to our capacity. As I mentioned, even complete walkthrough videos were published many months back, in terms of even how to download and how to set up, for example, the likes of the Google Family Link, how to manage the screen time, how to ensure that you self-moderate your child's phone or any device that you provide. So I think, and we've gone onto media as well on this, and we've done live demonstrations. But I should admit, Professor, again, the amount of time that the media also gives to these sort of aspects are absolutely low. Right. And we as a regulator can't go begging for screen time, media time, right? You would know that being an ex-regulator as well. But I think it's a concerted whole of government effort. It's not just the government, it's the media as well that has to talk about these things. And I'm sure that if we can make enough amount of awareness, I think we are still not too late, because digital transformation is here to stay. There's going to be a hybrid model of learning. So I think it's all out there. It's just a click away. It's just, I believe if we can fix this awareness piece, I think that's going to be the solution for this, because certain countries have tried so many things. The Pakistan Regulatory Commission have started banning. They lost the Supreme Court case last year. The Telecommunication Act doesn't allow for us to block content, and I'm also not advocate to block any content, right? And there are certain aspects of digital democracy that we need to also abide by. So I think as we go along, it's as much as we manage our children on so many other facets of lifestyle, right? We don't give a sharp knife to a 4-year-old. Then why are we basically handing over a phone to a 4-year-old just to pacify that child? Again, I'm not blaming the parent. I'm also a parent, but I also do know a fact that it's been the parents who have also given the mobile devices to children to pacify them very easily, right? So they get completely addicted. So I think, again, awareness and more awareness is the key. Through the Government of Sanvedana program, as much as we give connectivity, Professor, we've enabled over 1,000 plus villages with 4G across amidst these COVID challenges. We follow that up with real-time online awareness sessions for each school, specifically separately for parents and children. For parents, we talk about how this connectivity is not just for their children to get into only social media, right? It is about to use the likes of eTakshala, the e-learning platform, which we made completely free of charge. And for the children, we also talk about potential threats that they may have, for example, right? Cyberbullying, threats that they may face on the social media front. Again, Professor, I don't think we can tell a Generation Z audience to not use social media. It is to say, look, if you are not going to give a phone number of yours to a stranger you meet in the street, then why are you accepting a unknown friend request, for example? When you explain this and articulate, the next generation understands. It's just that you need to articulate it. So I think it's not just a regulator, it's got to go through from all as I said, the whole of government as well as the private sector has to get involved. The education ministry has to get involved on this as well. So I think we need to continue that momentum on that. I think that's the only solution to this. As much as we look at creating more and more adoption, we are talking today about 2% of adoption on online shopping, right? I mean, there are reasons for that as well, right? I mean, it's not just having internet access. It's about the financial inclusivity. How many of us has access to a online enabled debit card or a credit card in Sri Lanka? Right. So there are basic aspects we need to look at, right? I mean, as much as we talk about the next generation of technology, I think what this report has done is, it has opened up the eyes to discuss the key root causes and what has to be fixed on the root point, Professor.
I have Nadia Najab online, waiting in line, but please give me a few minutes, Nadia. Shirani Elasinger from Sarvodaya Fusion would like to make some contributions on this question that we've been discussing. So Shirani. Go ahead, Shirani. You are unmuted, but I can't hear you. No, I'm not getting any sound. Okay, we'll postpone that. We'll come back to you.
Samajiva, can I just add something to this point before we move on? I mean, I agree with lots of the points that have been raised and the need for, using technology or training in terms of managing online education. I think one of the points that are also key is that, when the education burden falls on the parents, you create an entire country of, I mean, this is happening all over the world as well, where depending on how the parents take to the teaching, there are all these different kinds of learning outcomes that you're getting. So there also needs to be something that comes about teaching. If it's going to happen from home, then parents need to be better educated on how to deal with children in school, because you send them to school because you are not trained to teach them. And now when you bring it back into the home, it really creates a whole different atmosphere for the child's learning as well. So it's not only about the whole idea about supervision and also who's learning, it's really creating a lot of inequalities. That is also something very clear in your report, showing who is actually using these systems.
Yeah,
more.
those with educated parents tend to do better, right?
Yeah. And of course, educated households have better access to internet, while as poorer households are having to deal with like other methods, which is also why the education system also dealt, as Ms. Ilankovan said, they did one thing in the northern province, one thing in the southern province, one thing in another province, which is also really disparate. So we also really need to deal with the inequalities that it might be creating.
Okay, let me go to Nadia Najab. I'll come back to Shirani if possible, but Nadia, your question.
Yes, thank you. Very interesting insights, Gani, from your presentation. One of the questions I have is about the gender gap, which you highlighted, which said there's a reduction between 2018 and 2021 for women's access to smart devices from 34% to 7%. Did the report actually show what it was being used for? And was it just specifically for the women, or was it a device for a household?
Gani, I think you should take that.
Yeah, thanks, Nadia. We don't have a sense of what these were being used for, unfortunately, but these are numbers at an individual level. Now, it is entirely possible that women own these phones and then they use it for other purposes, but we can only say that women said that they own these, that they own these devices. We aren't able to comment on that further, unfortunately.
Right. Let's see. Shirani, are you okay now to talk?
Hello.
Hi, she is. We can hear you. Good.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, yes, thank you, sir. Yes, I'm sorry for the interruption and the disturbances. Yes, shedding light on what Ms. Senanayake was telling, and also what Dr. Sujatha was mentioning. Actually, Sarvodaya Fusion, in collaboration with the Ministry of Education, ICTA, and with Facebook, and the latest partnership was with Google. We have been able to raise awareness among school students and the other community segments on effective and ethical use of internet and social media, internet, and also the devices on the effective use of all these devices and applications.
Shivani, can you give us a sense of the numbers that you have actually touched?
Yes.
Teachers as well as students?
Yes, actually, we have been doing this program since 2015 at our own capacities, but we must be thankful to the Ministry of Education for coming on board with us since 2018. And ever since, they have been supporting us very strongly. And up to now, we have educated over 100,000 school students and parents. Of course, parents, it's not a very large number, but specifically, we have been touching school students and youth. So when I say youth, it's actually we started training university students, and last year, that is in 2020, we touched the families. That is specifically touching the parents, and as Ms. Senanayake correctly said, we are not blaming the parents, but everybody has a role to play. So it's same like we are nurturing our children in the real world. We need so we are the frontier. The context is changing, so we are going into more digitalized environment. So the parents also has to need, parents has to understand the change in context. So we need to adapt, because we can't stop anywhere. We can't go into the same old ways of doing it. We need to accept the changes, and we need to do our part as parents as well. So they need to understand the rules and norms applies in the real world, still applies in the digital world. So they need to kind of set the rules for their children. So this is what we insist. And as Dr. Sujatha said, we have now been able to touch on, take the program to very young ones, starting from age 7, actually, because earlier we were focusing on children aged 13 and above. So we still had a gap, because the recent times have brought in much younger children to the online, the digital world. So we had a gap there, which we had to fulfill urgently. So with this new program that we are introducing, we have been now able to touch the very young age. So it's a combined effort, actually, the children, the teachers, and the parents. Also institutional wise, all tech companies and the government, as well as community service organizations, we all have a role to play, because as far as we know, government cannot do everything all by themselves. The ministry cannot do it all by themselves. So I guess we all have a combined effort to make there. Yes, thank you.
Right. I think, Sujatha, you had your hand up for a second time.
I need to ask a question for Shirani. Actually, 100,000 children, but we have 4.2 million school children, and we have an incredible network, provincial network of education. Sri Langovan, there's a director education, zonal directors, divisional. Is there some one simple video that we can get out to these schools? If we have one such thing, and even for the ICT, I'm asking, if you actually, I don't know about the ministry, but if you get it, the nine provincial directors, we can really, that's incredible network, we can communicate with the parents. Is there some simple one video that, we can communicate to the schools and educate 4.2 million school children, not maybe the comprehensive program that you're offering, but something simpler, just a video maybe.
I guess the responses will have to come from Shirani and Mr.
Yes.
Ilangovan and Mr. Senanayak.
Yes.
Shirani, you got a response?
Yes, certainly. Yes, thank you, Dr. Sujata. And certainly, this has been a challenge, and I guess this really calls into the sustainability of this program. So we have already realized this because we are doing it on a seminar mode, and it's called a physical or in-person seminar. So that is why the number still maybe in number-wise, it has gone into 5-digit number, but as you say, comparatively it's a low number. And I mean, how long it will take for you to reach to all the schools or all the school population. And once you cover it, then again, the new set of or a group is coming into the stream, adding into the stream. So this cannot go on like this unless you have a very sustainable model created. So actually, we have been revising our content, and this has been a really journey filled with a lot of experience for us. So with this experience and with this, I would say especially the content and the applicability of it, and the challenges we face with all this, I think now we are on a better footing to go into this step which you are proposing, going into more digitalized version of this knowledge sharing. And actually, during the COVID period, we have been conducting these programs online actually for the children. So we really didn't have to go physically and do these programs. So they were connecting from homes with their parents. So that again was another good experience, and also it gave us a lot of, I would say, idea of doing it, because when parents were also connected with the children, so they learned as a group the content. Yeah,
Shirani, if I could, I need to get, I can't allow this to be a completely education dominated session.
Yes.
Of course, Sri Lankan seem to be putting a lot of weight on education, which should be a good sign for Mr. Ilangovan. So if you could briefly comment, sir, I want to come back to Zulfa and talk a little bit about e-commerce and so on before we wrap up. So if the two of you can briefly respond to this, if you have any responses. Mr. Ilangovan?
Yeah, being the Commercial Secretary, actually totally endorse and will extend our full support. And it's a high time to start this, immediately, and work through that network and the team. We can roll out our plan to reach all these students and parents. Yeah.
Senanayak, you have anything to add?
No, Professor, I think, the regulator, we have enough content that we curated on this awareness.
That's right.
We're happy to share with the Ministry of Education, but I think the MOE has to take a lead on this. And I'm really appreciative of also the support there. It's very interesting to see what they've done. So, I think, again, let's get together and do it, right? We are completely on it.
So coming to Zulfa and actually everybody, the entire panel, one of the things that we looked at in the old days, when we were rolling out voice was, we just put it out. We didn't have what we call an ecosystem. You just put it out, people use it. You didn't have literacy issues, device issues, etc. What is now interesting is this new problem that we have. Those who are not using the internet, they are giving an answer. Gayani, you can maybe give me the percentage on that. They're giving an answer which says, I don't have a need for it. So it's people like Zulfa's company, and Zulfa is not limited to mobility provision. He's a serial entrepreneur. He knows the startup phase very well. So I'll come to you, Zulfa. What are the things that you can do to make the internet more attractive? Because while I agree with Mr. Senanayak about getting the policies right, getting the tax system right, and so on that side, we really have to create demand. People have to have a reason to go and spend their money on this service. So the number that she has just put up, no interest, not useful. That is 24% of those who are not using the internet say, I know what it is, but it's not useful to me. So how do we make it useful is the question. Zulfa?
Yeah, perfect. That's a beautiful question. And I think that's the question we keep answering every day, right? So I think just to start off, I have actually two answers there. One is the experience, right? I think as a company like us, we are investing on the experience, right? We want to make sure that it is far better than what you would traditionally do, right? I mean, let's take the ride hailing, the taxi business, right? Gone were the days you would go and negotiate and haggle with a driver on the fees that he has to charge you, right? Today, you press a button and the taxi comes to your doorstep, right? And that's what we are investing on, right? So just the same way, when it comes to food delivery, we want to make sure when you press that button, the food comes to your table, right? Or the food delivery boy comes and rings your house door. So this is the magical experience that we are trying to create as a company. Of course, we're building up the people, we're building the human resources required to be able to create product experience like this. So that's on one side. And I think as we keep investing on this, we are confident more and more users will come in. And as a company like us, we've also made it multilingual, right? So we are in Sinhala and Tamil, apart from English, to make sure that we are building a product for Sri Lanka. That's on one side. The other side is the use cases. I think obviously we were very successful in the ride-hailing game, and now we're in food. I think we need to create more use cases through digital platforms, and I think a big part will come through public services, right? Government solutions that we would love to be part of it as well. If we have access to it, we as a company can take it to the public, right? And I think as more and more public services are available through APIs or whatnot, and that will be the pivoting point. Obviously we've been talking about digital payments. I think we need, as a company, we need clarity on where that is going, because we also would like to play a key role in that ecosystem. And of course, all the other services that the country is trying to open up. We are very excited about the digital ID. We like to see how we can be also part of that whole ecosystem, so that we as a company, because we have over 3 million to 4 million users already, we love to see how we can get it to the public out there. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, so I don't see any raised hands. But let me just do one follow-up question to Zulfa. What do you think about the people who had come and used services during the lockdown and then gone back to the old ways?
Yeah.
Doesn't that show that the old ways were kind of good enough or even better than the digital experience?
Certainly. I think, there are certain services, obviously when the pandemic happened, we had to make sure that we could do something out there, right? I think it was some sort of a half-baked product that we got out, right? And I think now we are making sure, understanding the requirement and understanding what users want, we are building on that, right? I think you nailed it when it came to retail. We saw a lot of people going back to the supermarkets, right? And I suppose there was a lot more choice. You get everything you want, right? The whole problem of e-commerce is that you don't get to feel the products, right? Or you don't get to see it, right? So that those are the problems. And I think we are confident, right? I think people need a lot more assurance that when they order, they get what they want. And we are trying to work on that. We're trying to build that gap, sort of cover that gap with the partners that we work with, right? And we've still seen growth taking place, right? And we're confident that going to the future, we will see a lot more people adapting to platforms like us to get their groceries, food, and whatnot delivered.
So, Karin, you had a question about e-commerce outside the Western province, eh?
Yeah.
Can you have any insights that you can share on that? So, clearly, well, that's urban. Even otherwise, Western province is sort of 8% and the rest of the country is 1%. Yeah.
So how come it's not growing there?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to our business, right, one of the problems we have is pertaining to density, right? We want to operate at high economies of scale, right? And for example, Colombo is the most dense city in the country. And obviously in Colombo, you have certain areas that we love to operate, right? Because we can do deliveries within 20-30 minutes, right? But when you go outside, the density breaks, right? And we have a word what we call liquidity of supply, right? And when that liquidity breaks, it's very difficult to deliver that product at lower costs. And then that's probably what you're seeing here. Now we know for a fact Kandy is the second most dense city in Sri Lanka, and we are seeing a lot more action taking place there as well. So it works in both ways, right? Obviously, spending power plays a role, access to smartphones and all that plays a role. But in our business, density plays a key role for us to even further invest in improving that.
We are almost at the end of time. I'd like to give the last word to Mr. Senanayaka. Thank you very much for your considerable contribution so far.
Thank you. No, I just want to shed some light on this phenomena that's on the screen as well. To answer your first question on the report, out of the 58% who used online platforms, a staggering 80% going back to the manual process, I think it's a psychographic issue, right? I mean, the weekend, shopping around due to the pandemic has become the outing for the family, right? I mean, this is beyond certainly sometimes on technology. But number two, in terms of the lack of enablement across outside of the Western region, there are a couple of aspects. One is the connectivity, I should admit. Second thing is we need to look at the adoption of smartphones, for example. We are still at about a 50%. So we need to encourage and increase the adoption of smartphones in Sri Lanka. We need to sunset 2G and 3G, which we are working on right now, and encourage people to basically get onto more and more smartphones. So that's a device enablement issue. Number three, the biggest issue we have is, although we proudly state the highest literacy rate as a country in the Southeast Asian region, today, if you look at the key imperative, the digital literacy, we have a lot to work on. It's not, as you would know, it's not even the computer literacy anymore, it's a digital literacy. Now, that's the literacy people have of using these sort of platforms. Now, for example, if you look at even the Colombo region, our digital literacy is as low as 44%. If you look at Galle, it's at about 27%, Mathura 30%. I mean, these are the hotspots of areas that's developing very fast. So I think the digital literacy is key for us to also sort out in terms of ensuring more and more adoption in terms of the likes of online shopping and utilizing services such as PickMe, which Jeffrey mentioned. So I think we as a country need to work on that digital literacy piece as much as we've been basking the glory of talking about the highest literacy rate. I think now the key imperative for us is getting that digital literacy rate up, and also the financial inclusion piece has to come in line. Otherwise, again, we are back at square one because people cannot literally go online and complete the transaction. So, I mean, that's my 2 cents on this.
Thank you very much. I think at LearnAsia, we have always believed that technology must be something that puts money in people's pockets and hope in their hearts, and not another spending item that takes money from their pockets. So I think this kind of study where we are really looking at the demand side as well as the supply side factors, and we are looking at what is actually happening on the ground using scientific sampling, I think this can really help us to move forward. I'd like to thank our very powerful, strong panel, Mr. Oshada Senanayaka from the ICTA and the TRC, Mr. Ilangovan from the Northern Province Secretary of Education. Sir, you have added, again, thanks to this technology. Otherwise, we would be running this Colombo-centric operations. And now we are now able to bring people from wherever they are, even within the country or outside the country. So I'm very thankful to your participation. Zulfa, bringing the private sector perspective, hands-on, dealing with real issues in real time. Again, I'm very, very grateful. And Karin, your perspectives from looking at this problem through the qualitative lens and all the other research that you have done. And again, I want to say that for a old gray-haired guy like me, I think it's very, very good that we have people with children in school taking decisions about technology and technology policy in this country. I think that's really very important. And again, thank you very much, Gaini and Tharaka, for the presentation. And for our audience, this has been streamed live on Facebook, and it will be available for people to look at subsequently, and the reports and all the related material will be available on our website. Thank you very much for a very encouraging and lively session. We hope to see you again at some of our Learn Asia events. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
Thanks.